Hello, kitties. We're going to have a good time together because we are talking with Massachusetts-based band Vapors of Morphine,
Yes.
rising from the embers of the great morphine, and then growing and expanding and doing all this other stuff. And it got me thinking about a incredibly interesting question. Do you know which state in this country? There's only one state that has an official state rock song. Do you know what that state is? And do you know what that song is?
Is it Massachusetts? Because it's your home
No,
state.
it is
Oh,
not.
okay.
There's two where there's been a fight over it, and that's what I wanted to get into.
Well, do
So,
tell.
so Oklahoma made "Do You Realize" by the Flaming Lips, and then that
Wait,
governor.
they didn't make Rogers and Hammerstein, Oklahoma?
I think that might be the official song, but not official state rock song.
Right. So they actually go genre. So I give Oklahoma
Correct.
credit for having songs of all different types, but
Yes. So
you
their
can't
governor.
have
No, it's where the wind comes sweeping
sweeping
down the
down the
plain.
rain, right?
Yeah, and do you know where that was written?
Not in
About
Oklahoma.
3 miles
That's
down
right down the road from you.
from my place. Anyway,
See?
so their official state rock song was "Do You Realize," and then that governor finished their term. A new governor came in, and it was immediately like, "Nope, not happening."
I don't realize.
You do not realize. And then the reason I was wondering about this is because Massachusetts has been locked in a almost decade-long debate over what its official state rock song should be.
Oh,
For a while, Roadrunner by the Modern Lovers was,
okay.
1,000 miles an hour past the Stop
Mhm.
and Shop with the radio on.
Okay.
And then surging from behind, mostly because two state legislators are big fans, "Dream On" by Aerosmith.
Ah, okay.
Now, myself, I feel like Roadrunner is a better state anthem.
I mean,
It's
Dream
about the
On
love of
isn't
radio.
right.
It's not really a welcome to our state. I'm
It's
going to go to
not. That's
Massachusetts and
right.
everything I've imagined is going to be wonderful. And yeah, Dream
Right.
On.
Right. That's the thing. It doesn't, it's an incredible song, but doesn't fit for what they're going for.
Right. Whereas Roadrunner, it's all about driving around late at night with your radio on past a
Uh-huh.
Stop and Shop,
Uh-huh.
and you're on the turnpike. What more could you?
Yeah. That
Plus, it includes the line, "I'm
feels,
in love with Massachusetts."
which that's hard to beat.
Exactly. So any guess about the official state song?
No, what is it?
It is Ohio.
Okay. Is it
If you
the
want to
heart of
guess.
rock and roll?
Nope.
Because it's still beaten in Cleveland.
No, it is "Hang on Sloopy."
Oh,
It's been
all right.
adopted since as the Ohio State official marching song.
Ah.
But the bill that they passed making it the official state rock song, the whole where every paragraph begins with "whereas,"
Yes.
it is hysterical.
Really?
Whereas adoption of "Hang on Sloopy" as the official rock song of Ohio is in no way intended to supplant "Beautiful Ohio" as the official state song, but would serve as a companion piece to that old chestnut. And whereas if fans of jazz, country, and Western classical, Hawaiian, and polka music think those styles should be recognized by the state, then by golly, they can push their own resolution just like we're doing.
All right. That's some
And
forceful words there.
whereas "Hang on Sloopy" is of particular relevance to members of the baby boom generation who were once dismissed as a bunch of long-haired crazy kids, but who are now old enough to vote in sufficient numbers to be taken quite seriously. And whereas adoption of this resolution will not take too long, cost the state anything, or affect the quality of life in this state to any appreciable degree. And if we in the legislature just go ahead and pass the darn thing, we can get on with more important stuff. And whereas Sloopy lives in a very bad part of town and everybody, tries to put my Sloopy down.
That's
there you go.
It makes me want to move to Ohio. And I've never wanted to live in Ohio.
Okay. Yes. I'm more familiar with Morphine than Vapors of Morphine. Were you a fan of the band before you joined the sort of resurrected version?
I didn't know the band until I moved up here in 2000, the end of 2005. I
Mhm.
had heard of them, and I think I may have heard them on a jukebox or something like that, but I wasn't aware of them until um, I think when Twine Men were touring. So this would probably be around 2001 or something, a couple years after Sandman had died.
Mm.
Um, Dana Colley, the sax player, and Billy, the drummer, Billy Conway, formed a band with Billy's partner Laurie Sargent and a string of bass players called Twine Men, named after one of Sandman's little cartoon series. And the idea being that a band was a few people that are basically just combined in a ball of twine, just,
I
just like
love.
attached to each other and tangled up.
Which makes total
Um,
sense.
yeah, so they went with that. So they were touring for a little while, very underground, small places. And I heard of that. Somebody said, "Oh, they're playing at the Circle Bar or whatever." And when I was in New Orleans, which is where I lived for 12 or 13 years. They were said, "Oh, this is the band that came out of Morphine." That was and I knew that it was a bass and a sax and drums and no guitar, but I didn't realize the slide bass thing and everything. And wasn't until I moved up here when I had mutual friends with Dana and um, who connected me with them. And before I met them, I acquainted myself with their music to some extent and was quite taken with it from the beginning.
And so when you joined the band, you did not play two-string slide bass guitar before joining.
No, I don't think anybody did.
Yeah, exactly. How did you take to it? How long did it take you to kind of feel like, all right, I can kind of get that sound?
I had played odd instruments before. A friend of mine who I had a guy who had made fast friends with shortly after I moved to New Orleans. Sorry, to Cambridge. Was a bass player, a washtub bass player, or one string bass player who he and I had a mutual friend in New Orleans who used to live up here, named guitar player named Kenny Holiday, who lived up here for about 10 years and then moved down to New Orleans for 10 years, and or more than that, rather, to live down there. And I had met him down there, played on the street with him. And this guy, Washtub Robbie Phillips, was a builder, was a builder. He's in a nursing home now, but we were playing a lot of my music, and he often played a one string, sort of like a washtub bass, but more with a fixed neck on a big bongo drum sort of thing, conga drum, I should say. And he started messing around with diddly bows, the sort of one string or two string slide things, that homemade guitars, basically fretless
Hmm.
guitars. And I had played around with some of those for like a four string thing. I had played an open tuning and I had played a lot of slide guitar. So when I first started picking up the slide bass, I realized that there was a certain way that Mark usually tuned the bass, which was exactly like the low two strings of one of the tunings I was used to using on guitar. So I felt like in some ways the bass was the easiest part of learning that music, because I already played slide, and the way, I got to check out and play Mark's instruments
Oh,
and
wow.
saw how he set them up, and it's really very forgiving system where you crank the strings up really high above the neck, so it can only be played with a slide. He used I think a glass slide, and I use a metal socket. But you have a lot of, you basically feel your way around, and you don't have to press down very much, and you just sort of glide along the strings. I actually really I took to that instrument quite quickly. It was more the singing and the style of music that was more alien to me, or difficult for me to cop to. But
How did you make that transition? Just through diving in and immersing yourself, or was it a slow burn?
Well, I had Dana and Jerome and I had played on and off, sort of informally. Sometimes I'd get a gig in my name, and I often had Jerome. I met Jerome around the same time I met Dana, through um, through friends, and he started doing some gigs for me, just backing me up. It turned out we had a mutual friend in New Orleans who he had known in Bloomington, Indiana, and played with in the probably in the 70s or early 80s. Um, anyway, so one time I didn't have a bass player I could find, and so I asked Dana if he could fill in because I knew he used electronic pedals and played his sax through an amplifier, and I had a feeling he had an octave pedal which would lower the pitch of the instrument a whole octave, and he did, and so he basically just plugged that in and played bass by playing the saxophone. So that was our first ventures. That was when I was still playing just guitar mostly. Before we started doing the Morphine thing for a couple years, we did that on and off. And then I knew that I wanted to play with these guys. And so when the opportunity came to go do this tribute concert, I just said, yeah, sure. I mean, I listened to rock music. I came up on rock music, but I never really was. I kind of dropped out of contemporary music in the 90s, so I missed most of what a lot of people my age think of as like their seminal, rock music years or whatever. I wasn't paying attention, and I missed grunge. It took me a few years to catch up. Um, um, but I mean, just playing a lot of the stuff that the way Mark was writing for Morphine was very sort of reductive. Like his whole philosophy was to take away anything he thought of extraneous. Originally, he wanted to just have a one-string bass, and I think much of the first album he did just use one string. But there were a couple of reasons that two strings was more advantageous. For one thing, he could do a power chord with two strings, or if he accidentally, God forbid, broke a string,
You got to back up.
be really bad with But then just the sax and the drums and what they called implied guitar. There's no guitar. There's a little bit of guitar on Morphine records. You can hear it like just a little bit in the background in some songs, but it's very subtle. And the way Dana plays, and the way Mark played, you really got the feeling that there were guitars in there. And it's sort of a cheater situation because the way Mark played the bass, he took the two low strings off, and he usually tuned the two remaining strings to a fifth, like a power chord, and really just a little bit below guitar pitch, the lowest guitar pitch.
Okay.
But with bass strings on there and a big long neck and bass pickups, and through a bass amp, it still had that fat bass sound. So there's implied bass in a way as well as implied guitar. He's kind of right in the middle in a baritone situation. What was the question?
I think I hit it.
Yeah, you totally hit it. Yeah, that's perfect. Just kind of how you immersed yourself into it all. So that's perfect.
Yeah, and when we from when we first started jamming together, we felt I think Dana and I especially felt a real connection musically. So we had that before we started tackling the Morphine stuff.
And you had you were fortunate enough to play with, like you said, Jesse, but also, I'm sorry, you said were able to play with Jerome. Right. And with Billy Connolly before he passed. And so you sort of got to, kind of really immerse yourself in the Morphine world. What was that transition like when you went from paying tribute to Mark Sandman and the work that band created and that those guys created together to turning Vapors of Morphine into your own thing where you were, called on to, I'm assuming, write your own lyrics and help in the song creation process.
Well, we were doing some of that from the get-go. Um, I had learned a bunch of the Morphine tunes for this tribute show, and once that was done, we also played a bunch of other stuff that we were learning on our own stuff.
Mhm.
Some of just blues tunes, traditional blues tunes played in a strange way, or um, I wrote a couple tunes for our first CD, which was called Ever Expanding Elastic Waistband, before we were called Vapors of Morphine. That came out in like 2009 or 2010, I guess. It was right at the very beginning. Um, so we never were just solely doing Morphine covers. That would be like a lot of times if you go on tour in Europe or South America, we would do almost all Morphine covers and just a few other things, because it was sort of what we felt was expected. Um, and it's more in recent years that we've split it up, first more equally, and then nowadays we sometimes do shows where we don't do any Morphine material at all, depending on the length of the show. Um, um,
So you were always kind of walking that line between paying homage and expanding the sound in the group.
right. The idea being that um, um, the concept behind Morphine was a progressive one.
Mhm.
And they certainly, if you've ever listened to the last album, which was released after Mark died, The Night, certainly were growing musically and changing, and would not have ceased doing that if they continued on, if Mark had survived.
Mhm.
The other thing is a lot of the music that we perform, um, it's none of us are as prolific of songwriters as Mark Sandman was by a long shot. Um, um, but what we do is reinterpret tunes that are sort of roots and branches from the roots of Morphine. Um, Morphine is typically thought of as like sort of jazz rock, but there's a fair amount of blues in there as well. And if you look at Mark's, what he did before Morphine was a band called Treat Her Right, with Billy Conway, and playing a standing cocktail kit, like a one drum deal, and Jimmy Fitting on harmonica, Dave Champagne on slide guitar, and Mark playing what he called low guitar, which was just a guitar through an octave pedal playing bass lines. So sort of one step away from what he later did with the bass, and sort of basically what Dana sometimes does with us. But Dana had, since Morphine had invented his whole electric sax thing, he didn't do that in Morphine. They did some post production stuff on a couple songs, which implies that, but he never played electric saxophone on stage with Morphine. He's done that. He's really created an astounding new sound. There's some other people who have done similar things, but nothing quite like him with the baritone. With his particular tone is very recognizable and guitar-like in a way, anyway, and the way he plays. But his array of sounds and with the pedals he uses has changed quite a bit since Morphine. So we wanted to create a vehicle for that. So a lot of times when we're doing the Morphine stuff, he will play electric sax instead of just acoustic sax. And the way he does electric sax is he has his old 30s Con's baritone saxophone is a microphone on the mouthpiece just when he wants to play normal sax, but he's got a little pickup in the mouthpiece. I'm sorry, I mean the bell has a microphone on it,
Mhm.
and the mouthpiece has a little transducer microphone in it that goes to a preamp and to a whole effects pedal array and to a Fender amp. Um, so the sound, we've progressed. We've changed the sound of the Morphine tunes to some extent. Sometimes we'll play it more traditional, like when we did it a few years ago. We did it to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the release of the album Cure for Pain, which was their most popular album. We did a whole show, a couple of shows of the playing the anthem all the way through, and so we tried to more accurately imitate what the album sounded like and what the band sounded like. So and finally, so what we do is go into the roots that Sandman, things Sandman was into and the band was into was besides jazz. There's blues, like Delta blues, and rhythm and blues, and then there's African music. The band Treated Right that Billy and Mark were in was basically a blues band, and African music that Sandman was in was like Moroccan stuff, but. We've done a bunch of stuff which is more usually West African, although lately we've gotten into some Ethiopian music, and without any attempt to be really faithful to the music. We were very, with Jerome and now with Tom Airy, we've had incredibly well-versed drummers in terms of different styles of music. They both can play rock and jazz and blues, but also they're schooled in different African musics and different beats from around the world, whether it's Cuba or whatever. So that's been really helpful for us. Dana and I are sort of more just like listening to the records and pulling what we can, the melodies and everything. So we just take, instead of, since we're not really prolific writers, we'll take a tune by Ali Farka Touré from Mali, or Skip James from Mississippi, and do our own spin on it. And since it's essentially baritone sax, drums, and either guitar or bass or electric bouzouki, it's gonna sound strange, whatever we do.
In the best possible way.
And it's so interesting because at first blush, I feel like, having listened to your solo albums and the other records you've done, that at first listen, you think, I don't know how this connects with the sound of Morphine. And yet when you hear it all together, it makes complete sense. It's just a bunch of, well-versed musicians having a conversation over a bunch of different styles and genres that everyone is familiar with enough to kind of take and see where you guys can go with it.
Yeah, I mean, my most of so what I did, the band I had in New Orleans, the Delta Billy Boys, was essentially kind of a rockabilly thing. I mean, I was playing fingerstyle and slide guitar blues, but with an upright bass, electric guitar, and drums, and so it came out with sort of a peppy rockabilly feel to it. So kind of reinventing that, but there was a lot of the stuff. We did a lot of blues. But we also did I wrote a lot of kind of humorous songs, novelty songs, and then I have the Busted Jug Band on the side, which is a total novelty act. I've got but I think the closest thing, what we really tapped into was, sort of the darker Delta and Hill Country blues stuff, like Fred McDowell and R.L. Burnside that I was into. Or even Muddy Waters, and in those sort of darker keys and the low D tuning or whatever, and that was a place that it seemed like, I was where my head was at after moving here after like Katrina and everything. I was in a pretty dark place anyway, so we were sort of able to find this kind of meeting ground right there. So it is sometimes a little awkward. I don't I don't feel comfortable so much with the seriousness of Morphine in a way. Like I do I really enjoy playing the music, but there's some humor in it. There's some tunes that are quite funny in a really dry way, and I choose to think that certain tunes sort of half tongue-in-cheek, because there's a fair amount of posing and sort of very cool thing about Sandman, which I can't pull off even if I tried to. So that's always a little funny, and it's always a little funny when you're taking on a role where audience members sometimes have a deeper connection to the music than I do. So it's strange.
What's your favorite of the Sandman kind of humorous ones? Is it Top Floor Bottom Buzzer?
No, that's not actually one of my favorite tunes. Although that's a good one.
Thursday, I mean, it's pretty amusing
Thursday's
in some
great.
ways.
That's
Yeah.
that's very uncharacteristic in that it's an actual story, as a narrative. I would guess that was probably written early. As far as humor, Pulled Over the Car, which is an obscurity that we covered on our first record. I think it's on B-sides and otherwise or something, but it's just the repeating thing. It's this bass riff and kind of a funky riff, and it's like I was driving my car. I was getting kind of tired, so I pulled over the car. I got out of the car, walked around the car. I got a little air. I felt much better. I got back in the car, driving the car. I got a little tired, and it keeps on going over and over. I love that song. Every night, and then 11 o'clock is one that Dana sings. It's the whole song is every night about 11 o'clock I go out. Every night about
Yeah,
about
perfect.
every night about it's like that's the whole thing, and it's great because it is essentially it's quintessentially Sandman. He if he could have written a song with just one word, he probably would have. To see what he could get away with, basically, and he came pretty close.
When Every Night as a song musically has got so much space for you to just go out and kind of, sort of some sort of freeform fusion thing where it's just got that, hum going on the bottom end, and then just so much other stuff is happening around the rest of the song.
11 o'clock, you're talking about?
Yeah, 11 o'clock.
Yes, I mean, and the thing is, a lot of those tunes, and the same with the car. Some of the tunes, you can really interpret them since they're just basically one chord. You change the beat a little bit, you change the riff a little bit, you make it funkier, you make it harder, you make it slower, you make it quieter. It's and those are the things that I get off on. I don't really care about writing songs so much. I mean, sometimes it's fun to write a song if you get a good idea for one, but to me, that's usually a funny song,
Right.
I want to get people moving if I can. Put smiles on people's faces. I don't want to make people cry. So
It's fair. And how is the fans' response to some of those favorite songs? Is there an interpretation that they love the most? Is there one where they're like, oh my gosh, this is even better than the original?
Sometimes we get that, yeah. And we also do have fans who were introduced to Morphine through us. So
Oh, wow.
That's cool.
I usually, especially when we go abroad, we just get people who are just floored that they get to hear the music live, played by some of the people who.
Yeah.
There's Morphine had two different regular drummers and a couple other people who guested on records and stuff playing drums. So the only through line was Dana to us, and there's to me that's he's I don't use this word. He's unique. His playing is unique. There's nobody that sounds like him. So I've heard people try to do Morphine tunes, and it's tricky. It's really hard.
Yeah.
The fluidity he gets on a baritone is unusual. Most people, you hear baritones, even really good baritone players, they tend to go for the honk, and he has a real flow to his playing, which is quite unusual, quite distinctive.
Fear and Fantasy, the new album by Vapors of Morphine, is available right now. To get your copy, to find out when they're playing near you, check out their website, vaporsofmorphine.com.
You can check us out on all the various socials. Be sure to visit our website at rockandrollgradschool.com, and don't forget to leave us a review.
Today's show is produced by myself and Heidi Hegquist. Our reluctant producers are John Sauvé and Sandy Stone. Our willing producers are Rachel Allen and Randy Jeanette. Our intern is Zach Jackson. This one's for Philippe. Thank you, good night, and may all your favorite bands stay together.